Morning came to the northern edge of town with a kind of cold light that forgave nothing. It laid itself across the fields, the muddy shoulder of the county road, the frozen puddles beside the gas station, the patched tin roofs of storage sheds, and the temporary market that had sprung up beyond the tree line, as if it had grown there overnight out of plywood, cheap tarps, and human need. In that pale cutting light, everything looked more honest than people wanted it to. Jessamine Holden saw that before she even parked. She drove an old pickup that had once been dark green and had since faded into a stubborn working color, somewhere between dust and memory. She cut the engine and sat still for a moment, one hand resting on the steering wheel, her old military-issue watch catching a thin line of winter sun. Jess was 37 years old, a former Navy medic, and she looked like a woman built by discipline rather than vanity. About 5'9", lean and solid, narrow through the waist, but strong through the shoulders, every line of her functional. She kept her dark brown hair cut short in the military habit she had never fully abandoned, though it had grown a little softer around the edges in civilian life, just enough to brush the collar of her jacket when the wind moved it. Her skin was fair beneath the weathering of northern cold, and her grey-blue eyes had the restless stillness of someone who had spent too many years learning how to notice danger before it noticed her. People in town tended to call her polite, reserved, dependable if pressed, and lonely when they were being honest. Jess had come to the market for feed nails, lamp oil, and 2 hinges for the back gate that winter had nearly torn off. She had not come to have her heart interfered with. She preferred practical errands, practical things asked less of a person. The market spread in a rough crescent at the edge of a gravel lot outside town. Folding tables, crates of tools, jars of preserves, a dented freezer plugged into a humming generator, rusted farm parts, old blankets, coffee in paper cups, and the wary choreography of people buying what they could not afford, because not buying it would cost more later. She moved through it in her worn olive-gray jacket and faded earth-brown pants boots, leaving blunt prints in the frost-soft dirt. The clothes fit her the way old habits did, used, faded, dependable. A few people nodded. Jess nodded back. She was known enough to be recognized and unknown enough to be left alone. That suited her. Until she saw the sign. It was handwritten on a warped piece of cardboard and tied with twine to the side of a low pen made from wire panels and scrap wood. Mother Dog Plus Pups. Clearance price. Jess stopped walking. The noise of the market thinned around her. The mutter of bargaining, the clink of tools, the flap of tarps in the breeze. It all receded into something distant and cheap. The sign remained. Not good home needed, not must go to caring family. Not even for sale in any decent sense of the phrase. Clearance price, like damaged inventory, like old stock, like something that had failed to earn its keep. Inside the pen stood a German shepherd mother and 3 puppies pressed close against her legs. The dog was black and tan, though winter dirt and neglect had dulled the richness of her coat. She was about 5 years old, maybe a little older, and painfully thin. Her hips showed. Her ribs did not protrude sharply, but they hinted beneath the fur. Her belly hung low with the softness of too many litters. There was a worn look to her body that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with use. The black saddle across her back was still dark, but the tan at her chest and legs looked faded with stress, as if life itself had rubbed the color out of her. Her eyes were deep amber brown, but dimmed, not stupid, not broken, just withdrawn in the way living creatures become when the world has taught them that hope is expensive. The puppies were young enough that their ears had not fully decided what they meant to be. One was a little boulder pawing weakly at the wire. One stayed tucked beneath the mother's side, and the smallest, a black and tan scrap with oversized paws and uncertain balance, leaned into the warmth of her belly, as if warmth itself might disappear if it moved. People glanced at the pen the way they glanced at a bin of discounted hardware. A man in a camo hat bent to inspect a puppy and asked the price with a laugh in his voice. A woman in rubber boots said the mother looked used up. Someone else lifted one of the puppies under the belly, frowned as if assessing quality, and set it back down. No one struck them. No one shouted. That almost made it worse. The cruelty here was not loud. It was transactional. The mother dog shifted at once, placing her body between the hand and the other puppies. She did not bark. She did not snarl. She only moved with a tired urgency, protective even in exhaustion. Jess felt something old and unpleasant tighten behind her ribs. She had seen forms of suffering that came screaming. She had also seen the colder kind, the kind that happened under fluorescent light, under procedure, under language tidy enough to hide what it was doing. A man stood beside the pen with a styrofoam cup and a jacket the color of dirty canvas. He was in his late 40s, thick through the middle, with a flattened nose, rough-weathered skin, and hair the color of wet straw gone brown with neglect. His face had the permanent coarseness of a man who had spent years making his conscience smaller in order to make life easier. This was Griff Tanner. Even before he spoke, he looked like someone who handled living things as inventory if he thought there was money in it. "You buying or staring?" he asked. Jess looked from the dog to the sign and back to Griff. "How much?" she said. Griff named a number so low that for one strange second Jess thought she had misheard it. It was not a price. It was an insult. Jess reached for her wallet. Griff squinted. "You don't want to think on it?" "No." "For all of them?" Griff asked as if the idea itself offended good accounting. "For all of them." Griff gave a short breath that was not quite a laugh. "Well, that's your mistake." Jess counted the bills into his hand. Griff took them, but there was a hitch in his expression now. A tiny pause. Not gratitude, not relief. Something closer to recalculation. The kind a man made when a thing sold too quickly, and suddenly he suspected he had misunderstood its value. That made Jess's gaze sharpen. Before she could ask anything, a voice drifted over from the next table. "Ma'am." She turned. A woman stood behind a folding table with two metal thermoses, paper cups, and day-old muffins wrapped in clear plastic. She was in her 50s, small-boned and bundled in a navy coat with a knitted scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Her face was thin and wind-reddened, but kind in that cautious, practical way of women who had seen enough to know when pity needed to stay quiet. A few strands of gray blonde hair had escaped from her knit cap. This was Odell. She did not give her last name, and no one asked for it. "You bought them," she said, keeping her voice low. Jess nodded once. Odell's eyes flicked toward Griff, then past him toward the far end of the lot. "Then you should leave soon." "Why?" Jess asked. Odell pressed her lips together. "Because some things around here get sold twice." That sentence landed softly and badly. A lesser person might have laughed it off. Jess did not. She crouched at the pen and unlatched it. The mother dog backed one half step no more, the puppies bunching under her. Up close, Jess saw the faint thinning of fur around her neck, the healed shadow of pressure scars where a collar or breeding strap had sat too long. She also saw something else. The dog was terrified, yes, but not of her alone. She carried a broader fear, the kind that had learned patterns. "It's all right," Jess said, and heard the inadequacy of it as soon as it left her mouth. Still, she kept her movements even. Slow hands turned shoulder, no sudden reach. The smallest puppy stumbled toward the open space, then hesitated. Jess slid a wooden crate closer and lined it with an old blanket from her truck. One by one, she lifted the puppies. The bold one wriggled. The middle one whined softly. The smallest trembled against her palm. Too light for comfort. The mother watched every movement with terrible concentration. Then came the moment that stayed with her. When Jess reached toward the last puppy, the mother did not lunge. She did not bare her teeth. She stepped in front of the puppy and stood there on her thin legs, looking straight at Jess. Not challenging, not pleading exactly, but searching, waiting almost. as if she had arrived at the last possible test of what kind of person stood before her. Jess had seen that look once before, though, never in a dog, in another country, in another life. A child in a doorway looking at her as if mercy itself needed proving. She swallowed, and something in her shifted with a quiet that felt dangerous. "I'm taking all of you," she said. The dog held her gaze 1 second longer, then moved aside. As Jess lifted the crate and turned toward her truck, the market seemed to keep breathing around her. Somebody haggled over a drill. Somebody laughed near the produce stand. Odell looked away too quickly. Griff counted the money again as if it might tell him something new, and then the mother dog stopped at the edge of the pen and looked. Not at Jess, not at the puppies, but toward the far end of the lot. Her whole body changed, not loud, not wild, just still. A stillness so complete it felt like the hush before weather breaks. Jess followed her line of sight. At the edge of the market, half hidden behind a row of parked trucks, an older pickup sat facing the road, engine running, driver unseen behind the windshield glare. Waiting. The cold moved under Jess's jacket like a remembered hand. She opened the passenger side back door of her truck and stepped away so the mother could choose. For one heartbeat, she thought the dog might bolt. Instead, the dog gathered herself, touched her nose once to the side of the crate where the puppies lay, and jumped in. That was when Jess knew this had not been a simple sale. She shut the door and walked around to the driver's side without hurrying. People who had lived through certain things understood the value of not appearing to notice when they were being noticed. She started the truck and pulled out, kept her speed normal. In the mirror, the older pickup remained where it was for 3 long seconds. Then it rolled forward. The road out of the market curved between empty winter fields and a sagging line of fence posts silvered with frost. Jess kept one eye on the road, the other on the mirror. The truck behind her did not rush. It kept a measured distance, close enough to confirm, far enough to deny. She drove past the feed store turnoff, past the church road, past the stand of black pines where the county lane narrowed. The pickup stayed with her. Behind her seat, one of the puppies whimpered. The mother gave a low sound, not a growl, not fear alone, but warning wrapped in weariness. "All right," Jess muttered, though she was no longer sure who she was speaking to. At the next split in the road, she took the North Fork toward home instead of the main route. It was narrower, rougher, less used. I still clung to the shaded ruts. She drove it confidently, the way old training stayed in a person's bones even after the uniform was gone. The truck behind her hesitated at the turn, then kept going straight. Only then did Jess let out the breath she had been holding. By the time she reached the rise that overlooked her property, the sky had gone brighter, brittle blue over the hard fields. Her house sat near the little church beyond town, modest and plain, a back gate hanging crooked where winter had bullied the hinges. Smoke did not rise from the chimney because she had left in a hurry and planned to be back before noon. It looked like the home of a person who maintained what mattered and neglected what didn't. She parked and listened before opening the doors. Silence. Wind. A crow somewhere beyond the fence. She opened the back and lifted the crate. The mother dog jumped down after it, then froze in the yard, scanning everything. The porch, the shed, the church road, the bare maple tree, the open sky. Her fear had not left her. It had only changed shape. "That makes 2 of us," Jess said under her breath. She carried the puppies toward the porch. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of paws on frozen ground. The mother was following, not because she trusted her, not yet, but because sometimes the first step toward rescue was not faith. Sometimes it was simply having nowhere kinder left to go. The house sat a little apart from everything else, as if it had chosen distance long before Jess ever moved into it. It stood on a low rise just outside town, where the land flattened into pale fields and a narrow dirt road curved past a small aging church. The church was painted white once, but time had softened it into a muted weathered shade that matched the sky on cold mornings. A wooden cross leaned slightly above the entrance. Not broken, just tired. Jess liked it that way. Nothing here asked her who she used to be. Nothing asked her to explain why she preferred silence. The truck engine ticked as it cooled. She stood still for a moment listening, not out of habit alone, but because she had learned long ago that the absence of sound could be as important as the presence of it. Wind, a distant crow, the soft shift of weight inside the crate. She opened the back door slowly. The crate sat where she had placed it, the blanket inside slightly bunched from movement. One of the puppies stirred, letting out a thin, uncertain whine. The smallest one blinked up at the light, eyes too large for its face, body too small for the cold world it had been born into. The mother dog jumped down after her. Her paws hit the frozen ground without sound, but her body told everything else. She stood stiff, head low but alert, eyes scanning the yard in quick measured movements. Jess recognized that. The dog was checking exits. She moved a few steps forward, nose low, taking in the scent of the ground, the porch, the edges of the shed. When the wind shifted, she turned toward it, instantly reading it like a message. Nothing about her behavior was random. Nothing about her was careless. This was not a dog that had simply been neglected. This was a dog that had learned slowly and painfully that the world could change without warning. Jess lifted the crate. "Come on," she said. She didn't look back to see if the dog followed. She walked to the porch, opened the door, and stepped inside. The house was simple. One main room, a small kitchen, a narrow hallway leading to a bedroom, and a storage space that had once been a workshop. It smelled faintly of wood iron and something clean but unremarkable. Soap, maybe, or time itself. She set the crate down near the wall where the sunlight reached in the afternoon. Then she stepped away, not far, just enough. The mother dog appeared in the doorway. She did not enter immediately. She stood there framed by the light outside, weighing something invisible. Jess didn't move, didn't call her, didn't reach. After a long moment, the dog stepped inside. Not with trust, with calculation. Jess worked. That was the only way she knew how to do anything that mattered. She filled a pot with water and set it on the stove. Checked the cabinet, canned broth, dry food, rice, a small bag of ground meat she had meant to use for herself. That changed now. She moved with quiet efficiency, pouring water into a metal basin, testing the temperature with her wrist, laying out an old towel, cutting food into smaller portions. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Behind her, the puppies had begun to stir more fully. The boldest one pushed itself up and immediately tried to climb over the edge of the crate, tumbling backward in a soft, clumsy defeat. Another stayed pressed against the blanket, as if the world outside it might still be too much. And the smallest simply watched. Jess knelt slowly, careful to keep her movements predictable. She lifted the smallest puppy first. It trembled in her hands. Not fighting, not trusting, just enduring. Its fur was soft but uneven. Its ribs faintly felt beneath her fingers. "Hey," Jess said quietly. She didn't expect a response. She didn't need one. Behind her, the mother shifted sharply. Jess froze, then turned her shoulders slightly, angling her body away, not presenting a threat, not claiming space. The mother relaxed half an inch. That was enough. The bath came next, not all at once, not forced. She started with the smallest. Warm water, slow movements, no sudden grips. The puppy flinched at first, then went still, as if unsure whether this new sensation was allowed to be safe. Steam rose in thin curls, the house filled with a quiet warmth that felt unfamiliar even to Jess. One by one she cleaned them. The bold one wriggled, the quiet one barely moved. The smallest, after a while, leaned into the warmth. That more than anything made Jess pause. She had seen that before, in field hospitals. The moment a wounded person finally understood that the hands touching them were not there to hurt, the body would let go before the mind caught up. A shudder, a softening, a breath released that had been held for longer than anyone should have to hold one. This puppy was doing the same thing. The food came after, soft, warm, easy to swallow. She placed a bowl near the wall and stepped back. The mother approached slowly. She sniffed, paused, looked at Jess. Then, without eating, she nudged the bowl toward the crate. The puppies moved toward it instinctively. Only after they had begun did she lower her head. Jess exhaled quietly. "There it is," she said. "Not worthless, never had been, just used. Used until instinct itself had been rewritten into something that always served others first, and never asked whether it was allowed to want for itself." A knock came in the late afternoon, soft, measured. Jess stood immediately, body tightening in that old automatic way. She crossed the room one step at a time and opened the door. On the porch stood a woman wrapped in a heavy gray coat. A knitted scarf wound twice around her neck. She was in her 70s, small-framed but upright, her posture held together by something stronger than muscle. Her hair was silver-white, pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her temples. Her face carried deep lines, not harsh but settled like the land itself had shaped them over time. This was Mrs. Dorothea Vane. She lived beside the church. People said she had outlived more than she talked about. "I saw your truck," she said gently. Her voice had a softness that didn't beg attention but held it anyway. "And I heard something new." Jess stepped aside. Dorothea entered without hesitation, but not without awareness. Her eyes moved once across the room, taking in the crate, the bowls, the damp towels, the careful arrangement of space. Then she saw the mother dog and stopped. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she crouched slowly with care and rested her hands on her knees. "That one," she said quietly, "has forgotten what it feels like to be allowed." Jess didn't answer. She watched. Dorothea reached into her coat and pulled out a small bundle. Old bread wrapped in cloth and a pair of knitting needles tucked under her arm. "I brought something," she said. "Not much, but it's warmer than what you had this morning, I imagine." She moved to a chair near the window and sat. And then, without asking permission, she began to knit. The needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm, the kind of sound that filled empty spaces without demanding anything in return. Time passed. Light shifted. The puppies began to explore beyond the crate. The bold one tripped over its own paws and barked at nothing. The quiet one followed cautiously. And the smallest walked straight toward Jess. Not fast, not certain, but deliberate. It reached her boot, nosed the laces, and then with a sudden burst of clumsy courage bit down on them and tugged. The force of it pulled the puppy off balance. It rolled onto its back, stayed their legs in the air, still, as if surrender had become instinct. Jess stared down at it, something twisted in her chest. Then, unexpectedly, Dorothea laughed. Not loudly, but fully. "Oh," she said, wiping the corner of her eye. "That one still got a sense of humor." Jess didn't smile, but something in her face changed, just slightly. It happened without warning. The room had settled into something close to peace. The quiet hum of the stove, the soft clicking of knitting needles, the small, uncertain sounds of life returning. And then the mother dog froze. Not like before. This was sharper, deeper. She didn't move toward the door. She didn't bark. She turned her head slowly and stared at the far wall. Not the window, not the outside. The wall. Her body lowered slightly, muscles tightening in a way that had nothing to do with immediate threat and everything to do with memory. Dorothea stopped knitting. Jess followed the dog's gaze. There was nothing there. Just wood. Just shadow. But the dog remained still, watching, as if something invisible had stepped into the room and only she could see it. The moment passed slowly, like breath returning after being held too long. The mother relaxed just a fraction, but it was enough. Jess stepped outside. The air had grown colder, the light thinner. She walked the perimeter of the house, checked the road, the fence, the edge of the field. Nothing moved. No vehicles, no figures, no sound beyond the wind. But near the edge of the dirt path where the ground was softer, she saw it. A tire mark. Fresh. Deeper than the others. Not from her truck. She stood there for a long moment, then turned back toward the house. Inside, the knitting resumed. The puppies had settled again, and the mother lay near them, eyes open, but no longer scanning, watching, waiting, not for safety, for what came next. Morning did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, pale light, slipping through the thin curtains touching the worn wood floor. The edge of the table, the still form of a woman who had fallen asleep sitting upright in a chair. Jess opened her eyes before her body moved. That was how she always woke. Not with confusion, not with softness, but with awareness. The room came back to her in pieces, the faint warmth of the stove, the low rhythm of breathing that did not belong to her, the small sounds of shifting life near the wall. She turned her head slightly. The puppies were awake. The bold one was pawing clumsily at the edge of the blanket. The quiet one was watching the sunlight, like it had never seen something so simple before. And the smallest was asleep, not curled in tension, not tucked tight in fear, just asleep, its small body stretched, belly rising and falling, in slow, even breaths. Jess watched that for a long moment. She didn't move, didn't interrupt. She had seen people sleep like that once, after long deployments, after believing they might not wake again. That kind of sleep wasn't rest, it was permission. The mother dog was already awake. She lay just outside the crate, body angled, so that she faced both the door and the puppies at the same time. Her eyes were open, but not frantic. Alert, yes, always alert, but not on the edge of breaking. When Jess shifted her weight, the dog's head lifted slightly. She watched her. Jess nodded once, not as a command, as acknowledgement. That was enough for the dog to settle her head back down. Jess moved into the morning the only way she knew how. Work first, thought later. She checked the area around the dog's neck. Slow hands, predictable movement. The dog stiffened the moment Jess's fingers came near the scar. Not aggression, memory. Her body locked, not pulling away, not striking, just gone. Jess paused immediately. She didn't push through it, didn't hold her still. She withdrew her hand and sat back. "All right," she said quietly. "Not today." It was a small thing, but it mattered. Because forcing her would have been easier, and easier had already been done to her too many times. By mid-morning, the house felt different. Not quieter, not louder, just occupied. The kind of presence that didn't come from noise, but from life existing where it hadn't before. The smallest puppy woke next. It blinked, stretched awkwardly, then tried to stand and immediately fell sideways into its own legs. Jess exhaled through her nose. Something close to amusement. The puppy scrambled up again, determined this time, and made its way unsteady but purposeful toward her. It stopped just short of her boot, looked up, then leaned forward and rested its tiny chin against the leather. Not chewing, not playing, just touching. Jess didn't move. After a second, the puppy pushed a little harder, as if testing whether she would disappear. She didn't. The puppy settled. That was the moment Jess realized something had changed. Not in the dog, in herself. She worked through the morning with more care than before. Food, water, cleaning, reinforcing the small space near the wall into something more permanent. Boards set, a blanket folded twice, a low barrier that kept the puppies safe without trapping them. Every movement was deliberate, every choice quieter than it needed to be, because this wasn't about fixing. It was about not breaking anything further. She left just after noon. The puppies were fed. The mother dog had eaten slowly this time, not pushing the bowl away first. That alone stayed with her. She didn't like leaving. Not now, not yet. But there were things she needed to confirm. The market, the man, the price, and something else. Something that had been sitting in the back of her mind since yesterday. She took the truck, drove the same road, turned the same corner, and found nothing. The market was gone. Not packed, not closing. Gone. The gravel lot was empty except for tire tracks already softening under the wind. No tables, no tarps, no crates, no generator. No sign that anything had ever been there. Jess got out of the truck, walked the length of the lot, listened. Nothing. A man stood near the edge of the field, older, leaning against a rusted fence post. He wore a long coat that had once been black and was now a faded gray. His frame thin but still upright. His face was narrow, deeply lined with a white beard trimmed unevenly as if by habit rather than care. His eyes were sharp, though. Too sharp for someone who claimed to be uninvolved in anything. This was Harlan Doss. He lived nearby, kept to himself, and noticed more than he admitted. "You're late," Harlan said without greeting. Jess stopped a few feet away. "Market always move this fast." Harlan shrugged, slow and deliberate. "That one does." "Why?" "Because it doesn't belong to the town," Harlan replied. "It belongs to money." He spat lightly into the dirt. "They set up where it's easy, tear down before it's questioned." Jess's gaze narrowed slightly. "Who runs it?" Harlan gave a dry, humorless smile. "Men who don't like being asked that question." Silence settled between them. Then Harlan added almost as an afterthought, "You bought something from them." It wasn't a question. Jess didn't answer. Harlan nodded anyway. "Then you'd better decide quick whether you're keeping it," he said, "or just holding it." Jess turned back toward the truck. She opened the driver's door, and then she froze, not from sound, not from movement, from something small, something easy to miss. On the inside edge of the truck bed, just above where the crate had rested, there was a mark, a thin line, dark, clean, too clean to be random. She reached up, ran her thumb across it. Paint, fresh, and beneath it barely visible unless you knew to look a number. Not complete, not clear, but deliberate. A mark left behind, not by accident, by someone who expected the truck to move, to carry, to deliver. Jess stepped back slowly, her chest tightened. Not with fear, with recognition. This wasn't a transaction. It was part of something. And she had taken something out of it. The drive back felt longer, not because of distance, because of thought. When she reached the house, the first thing she noticed was the door. Still closed, unmoved, good. The second thing was the sound. Low, soft. Not distress, not panic. Something else. She stepped inside. The room was as she had left it, mostly. The puppies were together sleeping except for one. The smallest sat near the edge of the space, head tilted slightly upward, watching something only it could see. The mother dog stood in the center of the room, not tense, not aggressive, but very still. Her eyes were fixed on Jess, and for the first time there was no distance in them, no question, no calculation, just something quieter. Jess set her keys down slowly. "What happened?" she asked, though she didn't expect an answer. The mother dog didn't move, but her tail moved. Once. Not the hesitant flick from before. Not an accident. A choice. Jess exhaled, and something in her, something that had stayed locked for longer than she liked to admit, shifted. Later, when she sat by the wall, the smallest puppy crawled into the space between her boot and her leg. Didn't chew, didn't test, just stayed. Jess rested her hand near the floor, not touching, just there. The mother dog watched, then lowered herself beside the puppies, not guarding, resting. The house held the quiet of something changing, not fixed, not safe, but no longer empty. And somewhere beneath that quiet, the truth remained. There was a place where dogs didn't have names, and whatever had been done to this mother, there hadn't finished with her yet. The place did not look abandoned at first. That was the first lie. From the outside, the structure could have passed for any neglected outbuilding in the northern counties. Gray siding bleached unevenly by sun and frost, a sagging roof patched with mismatched sheets of metal, and a chain-link fence that leaned just enough to suggest time had taken its toll. But time didn't leave things like this. Time softened edges. This place had been stripped. 3 days had passed since the market. 3 days since the sign. 3 days since Jess had counted bills into Griff Tanner's hand and driven away with a mother dog and 3 puppies she hadn't planned on saving. In those 3 days, the smallest puppy had begun leaning into her hand when she fed it. The bold one had started barking at shadows. The quiet one had learned to sleep without flinching. And the mother, the dog Jess, had started calling Coda in her own mind. Though she hadn't said the name out loud, yet had stopped positioning herself between Jess and the puppies every time Jess entered the room. Small changes, the kind that could be undone in a second. Jess had spent the morning at the edges of town, the places between places where roads thinned and purpose became harder to name. That was where she found Sutton Dern. Sutton was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked with their hands more than their words. His face carried a permanent tension, not anger, not fear, but a kind of contained fatigue. His hair was cut short, uneven, as if done in the dark or by someone who didn't care much about the result. He wore a dark hoodie under a heavy work jacket, the fabric worn at the cuffs stained in places that told of long drives and longer stops. He stood beside a delivery truck, not a company vehicle too clean for that, but not personal either. The kind of truck that moved things without asking questions. "You're new," Sutton said, not looking directly at Jess. "I'm not," she replied. Sutton shrugged. "Then you're paying attention late." That was enough to keep the conversation going. He told her about the routes, the pickup points, the facilities that existed on no map and moved every few months. He told her about the paperwork that looked real until you read it carefully, and the names on the documents that belonged to people who didn't exist. He told her about the dogs, how they were bred for output, how the ones that didn't perform were cycled out. How cycled out meant different things depending on who was asking. And he told her one more thing. "There's a building," he said, "about 40 minutes north, off the old logging service road. It was active 2 weeks ago, might still have stock inside." "Stock," Jess said. Sutton flinched at the word as if hearing it reflected back made it uglier than he had intended. "Dogs," he corrected quietly. "There might still be dogs inside." Jess drove north. Coda sat beside her in the passenger seat. Jess hadn't planned to bring her. But when she had walked toward the truck that morning, Coda had followed without command, without hesitation, and jumped onto the seat before Jess could decide whether it was wise. There was something in the dog's posture that made arguing feel pointless. The building appeared through the trees the way bad news arrives. Gradually then, all at once. Jess cut the engine and sat still looking through the windshield. No movement, no smoke. No sound except wind brushing against the side of the structure. Beside her, Coda didn't bark. She didn't whine. She simply stood on the seat, her body stiff, nose slightly lifted, reading the air the way a person might read terrain before stepping into hostile ground. "This is it," Jess said under her breath. She stepped out. The ground beneath her boots was uneven, marked with old tire ruts that had hardened into ridges. Not fresh, but not forgotten either. Coda jumped down last, and the moment her paws touched the ground, she changed. Her body lowered slightly, her weight shifting forward, every muscle tightening, with a quiet readiness that had nothing to do with running away. She began to walk, not wandering, not exploring, returning. Jess didn't call her back. She followed. The door to the building wasn't locked. That was the second lie. It hung slightly open, as if whoever left had done so without finishing what they started. Jess pushed it with 2 fingers. It creaked not loudly, but enough to echo inside. The air hit her first, chemical, sharp. Not the rot of decay, not the wildness of neglect. This was cleaner, controlled, like something had been wiped down quickly, efficiently, without care for what remained underneath. She stepped inside. The light came through narrow windows set high along the wall, cutting pale rectangles into the dust. What remained told the story. Wire cages empty, plastic bowls overturned, A long table with marks where something heavy had been dragged across it repeatedly. A clipboard on the floor, pages torn out, not random, intentional. This wasn't a place that had been abandoned. It had been emptied, sorted, filtered. Only what mattered had been taken. Coda moved ahead of her. Her paws made no sound on the concrete. She passed the cages without stopping, ignored the bowls, ignored the open space. Then near the far wall she slowed. And Jess saw it happen. Coda's body lowered. Not in the way she had lowered herself before, cautious and protective. This was different. Her chest dropped toward the floor. Her head bowed. Her front legs extended forward slightly, weight pressing down as if something invisible were pushing her into a position she had held 1,000 times before. Submission. Not to Jess, not to any present threat, to memory. Her body remembered this place, remembered what was expected of her here. And even now, even after days of warmth and food, and a hand that didn't strike the programming, ran deeper than safety, deeper than trust. It lived in her muscles, in her bones, in the automatic surrender of a creature that had been broken not by violence but by repetition. Jess stood absolutely still. She had seen this before. In a forward operating base, she had treated a young corporal who had been held for 11 days. When they brought him back, he was physically intact. No broken bones, no visible wounds. But every time someone approached from his left side, he would drop to his knees and place his hands behind his head. Perfectly, automatically. As if his body had learned a language his mind hadn't agreed to speak. Conditioned compliance. That was what the medics called it. Coda wasn't abused in the way people imagined abuse. She was programmed, systematically, efficiently, until obedience wasn't a choice but a reflex and resistance wasn't beaten out of her, but simply made irrelevant. Jess crouched slowly. She didn't touch Coda. She didn't speak. She just stayed. After a long time, Coda's breathing changed. The rigidity in her body softened by a fraction. Not trust, not relief. Just the beginning of recognizing that the floor beneath her was the same, but the person beside her was not. In the corner, half-shadowed, lay another dog. A German shepherd female, older not by years but by damage. Her coat was patchy, her frame thinner than Coda's had been, and her eyes didn't track movement. They stayed fixed, not blind, just distant. Two puppies lay beside her, smaller, weaker, breathing but barely. Jess moved toward them carefully. "Hey," she said, voice low. No response. The dog didn't flinch, didn't retreat, didn't even acknowledge her. That kind of stillness wasn't calm. It was what happened when survival stopped expecting anything. Coda stepped closer to the other dog. She didn't push, didn't assert. She lowered herself beside her just enough to touch her shoulder. Recognition. The other dog's body twitched. A small movement. Almost nothing. But enough. Jess exhaled slowly. "They left you," she said quietly. Not a question, a conclusion. She stood and walked the perimeter, not searching randomly, reading the table, the drag marks, the space where cages had been stacked. This wasn't careless. This was efficient removal. She moved to the back wall. There she found what she was looking for. A row of metal hooks, empty but not clean. Thin strands of fiber still clung to them. Nylon worn from tension. Restraints, breeding lines, not tools for care, tools for output. Her jaw tightened. A vehicle approached. Not fast, not slow, measured. Jess stepped outside. The truck that pulled up wasn't new, but it was maintained. Dark paint, clean windows, no wasted motion as it rolled to a stop. The man who stepped out was in his early 40s, tall just under 6 feet, but built differently than most men around here. Less functional strength, more controlled posture. His clothes were clean in a way that didn't belong to this place. A charcoal jacket fitted with no visible wear, dark trousers, boots that had seen use but not abuse. His hair was dark, neatly kept, his face clean-shaven. Too clean. His eyes held something practiced, polite, measured. unreadable unless you looked long enough. This was Nolan Price, and everything about him said he preferred to remain unremarkable. "Miss Holden," he said, not a question, a confirmation. The name landed with precision. Jess hadn't introduced herself, hadn't left a card, which meant he had gotten it from somewhere else. The license plate on her truck, maybe, or from Griff, who had watched her count bills and drive away. Either way, the fact that he had her name before arriving told her exactly what kind of operation this was. Jess didn't respond. Nolan's gaze moved past her, taking in the building, the dogs, the small details others would miss. Then it settled on Coda, who had followed Jess outside and now stood a few feet behind her. For a brief moment, something in his expression shifted. Recognition. He looked at Coda the way a man looks at a tool that has been misplaced and then found in someone else's hands. "She shouldn't be here," Nolan said. "She is," Jess replied. Nolan tilted his head slightly, as if considering a minor inconvenience. "You purchased her," he said, "from a man who had no authority to sell her. That's your legal argument. It's a factual one." Nolan stepped closer, not enough to threaten, just enough to occupy space. His voice shifted slightly, the way a man's voice shifts when he decides the person in front of him doesn't need to be taken seriously. "This is a controlled operation," he continued, "one that depends on consistency, on tracking, on proper allocation. I'm sure you can appreciate that even if the specifics are outside your area of concern." Jess heard it, the careful condescension. She had heard it before from officers who assumed a medic didn't understand the larger picture. She didn't react to it. She didn't need to. "Call it what it is, Horsua," she said. Nolan's eyes flickered. "Efficiency," he replied. Behind them, one of the weaker puppies inside the building let out a thin, struggling sound. Nolan glanced toward it, then away, dismissed. "Those," he said lightly, "are not part of the discussion." Something in Jess hardened. Not anger, something colder. "They are now," she said. Nolan's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A recalculation. "You misunderstand your position," he said. Jess shook her head once. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." Silence stretched between them. Wind moved across the open field. Inside, Coda remained still in that lowered posture, still in that memory she hadn't chosen. Nolan straightened his jacket. "Keep her," he said. The words landed softly, too softly. He turned, walked back to his truck, paused before opening the door, and without looking back added, "Just understand, things that leave our system don't stay unaccounted for." Then he got in. The engine started. The truck rolled away. Jess stood there for a long moment, then turned back inside. Coda had not moved. Jess stepped toward her, slow, careful. She didn't reach immediately. She crouched instead, lowered herself to the dog's level. "Hey," she said. Nothing. She waited. Then gently she placed her hand on the side of Coda's neck. Not gripping, not holding, just there. For a second the dog's body stayed rigid. Then something gave. Not completely, not safely, but enough. Coda lifted her head just slightly and looked at Jess. Not through her, at her. That was new. She worked quickly after that. Wrapped the weaker puppies, lifted the second dog light enough that it felt wrong, brought them all to the truck. Coda followed without hesitating, without looking back. As she drove away, the building shrank in the mirror, then disappeared. But the feeling didn't, because now she knew. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't bad ownership. It wasn't even cruelty in the way people like to define it. It was something cleaner, colder. A system that didn't hate, didn't rage, didn't feel anything at all. It simply measured and removed what didn't perform. Back at the house, the days that followed held a fragile kind of progress. The second dog, the one from the facility, did not leave the corner for the first 2 days. Jess called her Wren, not because she expected a response, but because things without names were too easy to forget. Wren was older than Coda by a few years, but it wasn't age that made her seem distant. It was absence. Her body was underweight to the point where each rib told its own story, and her eyes still didn't quite settle on anything. They passed over the world, not blind, just unclaimed by it. The naming happened one afternoon when Mrs. Dorothea Vane stopped by. She stood near the crate watching the puppies stumble over each other in small, clumsy bursts of life. "That one," she said, pointing to the boldest of Coda's litter, "has no patience for the world." Jess glanced over. The puppy was currently attempting to climb over a bowl twice its size. "Call him Flint," Dorothea said. "Why? Because he'll strike at anything and expect sparks." The quieter one became Sage, because of the color, and because it stayed low observant, like something waiting to decide whether the world deserved its attention. The smallest remained Ember. That name had chosen itself the way small fires did, not by announcement, but by warmth. Dorothea left after an hour. She never stayed long, never overstepped. Her role was to arrive at the right moment, say the right thing, and leave before the weight of her presence became another thing to carry. The days passed, and with them something began to return, not fully, not safely, but noticeably. Coda moved differently now. She watched Jess directly sometimes for long stretches, as if she were trying to understand a language she had never been allowed to learn. And once, just once, when Jess set the bowl down and stepped back, Coda's tail moved. A single motion, small, almost uncertain, but real. Jess saw it and looked away immediately, as if acknowledging it might break it. Ember had begun sleeping against Jess's boot at night. Not chewing, not testing, just resting there, as if the leather and the warmth and the steadiness of a person who didn't disappear were enough to build a world on. Jess found herself talking more, not to anyone, to the dogs, to the room. Short sentences that didn't require answers. "Morning, that's better. Easy now." Words she hadn't spoken to another living thing in months. The sound of her own voice in the house surprised her sometimes. The way light surprises a room when someone opens curtains that have been closed too long. It was on the 8th night that everything changed. The house had settled into its evening rhythm. Stove ticking, puppies breathing. Wren in her corner, still but no longer absent. Coda lying near the crate, positioned as always to face both the door and the puppies. Jess sat at the table cleaning the hinges she had finally gotten around to buying. The ones that had started all of this. She heard nothing unusual. That was the problem. Something had drawn Coda to the front of the house. A sound from the road maybe, or the scrape of something against the porch. Coda had moved toward it, head low, ears forward, every instinct pulling her toward the potential threat. It lasted only seconds, but seconds were enough. By the time she noticed the silence from the back of the house, it had already happened. She stood, counted without thinking. Coda, Wren, Flint, Sage, one of Wren's puppies, and stopped. The space near the wall felt larger, empty. She moved faster now. Checked the corners, the crate, the small space behind the chair. Nothing. Then she saw it. Near the back fence, a gap. Small. Too small for anything larger. But just enough. And caught on the edge a piece of yarn. Gray. Frayed at one end. From one of Dorothea's scarves. Jess's chest tightened. Not in panic. In recognition. She stepped outside. The air felt colder. Sharper. Coda was already there. Her body low to the ground, moving fast, no sweeping the dirt in quick, desperate lines. She wasn't searching. She was hunting absence. Her breathing came in sharp bursts, her movements erratic. Everything she had learned over the past days gone, replaced by something older. something louder. She found the edge of the trail, stopped, and then let out a sound. Not a bark, not a growl. Something broken. Something pulled from a place that had never healed. Jess stood still for a moment, just long enough. Then she changed. It wasn't visible all at once, but it happened. The hesitation left. The softness withdrew. Her posture straightened. Her breathing slowed. Her focus narrowed. The woman who had spent years learning how to act with precision under pressure returned. Not the medic who healed, the medic who worked under fire, the one who triaged while the world burned and never let her hands shake until afterward. Dorothea arrived not long after. She didn't ask questions, didn't panic. She stepped out of her car, took one look at the fence, the yarn, the empty space, and understood. Her hands tightened around the small bag she carried. Then she reached inside and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I found this," she said quietly. It was pushed under the church door. Jess took it, opened it, read, "Return the dog. The small one lives. No signature, no demand beyond that. No urgency in the writing, just certainty." Behind them, Coda continued to search. Faster now, wilder. Her movements breaking into patterns that no longer followed logic. She circled return and lost the trail, found it again. Each time more desperate. Each time less controlled. Jess watched her for a moment, then folded the paper once carefully and slipped it into her pocket. "There's no blood," she said. Dorothea nodded. "That means they want something." "Yes, and that means Ember is alive." The sun dropped lower. Shadows stretched across the yard. The house, once warm with quiet life, now held something sharper, something waiting. Jess stood near the fence, looking at the gap, the thread, the direction of the trail. She didn't move, not yet, because she understood what came next, and the cost of it. Behind her, Dorothea spoke softly. "You don't have to become who you were," she said. Jess didn't turn. "I'm not," she replied, but her voice had changed. Coda returned at last. She stopped near Jess, breathing hard, eyes wide, searching her face now. Not for safety, for an answer, for something she had begun to believe existed and now might not. Jess looked down at her, then out toward the road, then back to the house. Two paths, both clear, neither clean. Night did not fall gently. It came sharp and clean over the northern fields, cutting the last color from the sky until everything settled into steel and shadow. Inside the house, no one slept. Not truly. The puppies shifted in uneasy dreams. Wren lay where she always lay, still but no longer absent. Flint and Sage stayed close to her now, as if instinct had rewritten their loyalties into something wider than blood. And Coda did not lie down. She paced, not wildly, not without pattern, back and forth across the same line, her nose low, her ears flicking at every sound that didn't belong. Jess sat at the table. The paper Dorothea had given her rested in front of her, folded, once edges clean. She hadn't opened it again. She didn't need to. The message was simple, and that simplicity made it more dangerous. She looked at Coda, watched her pace, and made her decision. Morning came with purpose. Jess moved early. Before the light had fully committed to the sky, before the frost had softened on the fence posts, before the world outside had decided what kind of day it intended to be. She checked the truck, rechecked the tools, mapped the roads in her head the way she used to map terrain, distances, blind spots, choke points where a vehicle would have to slow, stretches of open ground where anyone following would be visible for a quarter mile. She wasn't chasing anymore. She was intercepting. The difference mattered. Chasing was reactive. Intercepting required understanding how the other side thought, where they stored what they valued, and how they moved it when they believed they had time. Triage under fire. That was what this was. Read the shape of chaos. Find the wounded inside it. Before the window closed. She fed the dogs, changed the water, checked Wren, who had lifted her head that morning for the first time without being prompted. A small thing. Not today. Today she noted it, filed it, and kept moving. Coda watched her from the center of the room. The pacing had stopped some time before dawn, replaced by a stillness that was worse. She sat upright, eyes tracking every movement Jess made. Not with the old suspicion, not with the old distance, but with something raw and open. A question the dog couldn't ask and Jess couldn't answer. Not yet. Stay, Jess said from the doorway. Coda didn't move, but her eyes held. Jess closed the door behind her. Deputy Rowan Harlan arrived just after sunrise. He stepped out of his vehicle slower than usual, as if carrying more weight than the uniform allowed. Harlan was a man in his early 40s, built solid from years of working both the land and the law. His face held lines that hadn't come from age alone. Lines carved by decisions he'd made and decisions he hadn't. His hair, light brown and cut short, had begun to gray at the edges. His jaw was square, his posture firm. But there was something in his eyes now, something unsettled. "I can't do this clean," Harlan said without preamble. Jess nodded once. "Didn't expect you to." Harlan exhaled. "They've got paperwork, layers, ownership claims, transport permits, half of it signed through intermediaries that don't even live in this county." "And the other half?" Jess asked. Harlan met her eyes. "Doesn't exist." That was the part that mattered. There were things the law could do and things it couldn't. Harlan understood both. He was not a man who bent rules easily, but he was a man who recognized when the rules had already been bent by someone else bent so far that following them meant protecting the wrong people. "I can't go in with you," he said. "Not officially, not yet. But I can make sure that what you find gets documented. And I can make sure the right calls get made after." "After," Jess repeated. Harlan held her gaze. "After." That was enough. Tessa Calloway was already waiting near the church steps when Jess pulled out of the driveway. She leaned against the railing, notebook in hand, watching the exchange with a quiet intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like responsibility. Tessa was in her mid-30s, lean-built, dark brown hair pulled into a low tie, a few strands escaping across her cheek when the wind shifted. Her face was sharp, not harsh, but precise. High cheekbones, a steady mouth, eyes that didn't wander when she focused on something. She wore a dark parka, practical boots, gloves tucked into her pocket. A reporter, but not the kind that chased headlines. The kind that stayed when things became inconvenient. "I heard about the facility," she said. Her voice was even, measured. "I've been following something like this for months. Smaller reports, disappearances that didn't get called that." Jess studied her. Why stay with it? Tessa's expression didn't change. Because no one else did. That was enough. They moved quickly after that. Harlan coordinated what he could through channels that didn't ask too many questions. Tessa tracked the movement patterns, routes, times, recurring stops that didn't show up on official records but appeared often enough to matter. And then came Sutton. Jess found him at the same spot on the edge of town. He was standing beside his truck, but something about his posture had changed. He wasn't leaning anymore. He was standing straight the way a man stands when he has made a decision that he knows will cost him something. "I know where the puppy is," he said. Jess waited. "There's a truck parked off the old service road, the logging cut through Henderson's forest. It's a holding point. They use it when they need to keep something close but off the books. The truck won't move until tomorrow. Maybe the day after. They're waiting for you to make contact. Waiting for you to bring Coda back." "How do you know this?" Sutton's hands were still. That was new. The restless counting was gone. In its place was something quieter, something that looked almost like relief. "Because I was supposed to drive it," he said. Silence. "They called me last night. Told me to pick up the truck this morning and move it south. I said I would. He paused. I'm not going to. Jess looked at him for a long moment. She saw the cost of what he was saying written across his face. Not the fear of what they might do to him. The fear of what he had already done by staying silent this long. You know what happens when they find out, she said. Sutton nodded. Yeah. And you're doing it anyway. He didn't answer with words. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a map, hand-drawn, the service road marked in pencil, the location of the truck circled twice. Jess took it. Thank you, she said. Sutton shook his head. Don't thank me. I should have done this a long time ago. He got into his truck and drove away. Jess watched until the dust settled, then looked down at the map. The circle was precise. The hand that drew it had been steady. Sometimes the first step toward redemption wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it was just a pencil mark on a piece of paper offered too late and exactly on time. The service road cut through a stretch of forest that had once been used for logging and then forgotten. The road was narrow, unmarked, perfect for things that didn't want to be found. Jess parked at a distance, walked the rest. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Behind her, Harlan moved with careful awareness. He carried no weapon drawn, but his presence was its own kind of authority. The badge on his belt caught the light once and then disappeared under his jacket. Tessa stayed further back, not out of fear, but because she understood her role wasn't to enter. It was to witness. The truck sat alone in a clearing where the road widened just enough for a vehicle to turn around. Engine off. No movement. No sound except the wind through bare branches and the occasional crack of ice releasing its grip on a limb. Jess approached from the side, listened, nothing. She circled the truck once, checked the cab, empty, checked the ground. One set of footprints leading away hours old filled with frost. Whoever had parked it wasn't coming back soon. She moved to the rear. The doors were secured with a simple latch, not locked. That told her something. They weren't afraid of thieves. They were afraid of attention. A lock invited questions. A latch suggested nothing worth protecting. She opened it, slow. Inside, plastic containers sat stacked in neat rows, sealed, not random, organized. She moved one aside, then another. The containers were empty. Props, staging, something to make the truck look like it carried supplies instead of what it actually carried. Behind the last row against the wall of the truck bed, a smaller container. Vent holes cut clean, not improvised, designed. Jess knelt. She placed her hand on the lid, felt the faint vibration of something alive inside. Trembling. She opened it. Ember lay curled tight inside, body pressed against one corner, eyes wide but unfocused, breathing fast and shallow, alive but barely holding on to the idea of it. The puppy didn't move when the light hit him, didn't flinch, didn't cry. That absence of response was worse than any sound could have been. It meant he had already learned in just 2 days that making noise didn't bring help. That stillness was safer than hope. Jess didn't speak, didn't reach immediately. She placed her hand near the opening first, palm down, fingers still, close enough to smell, far enough to choose. She waited. Ember's nose twitched, once, twice. Then slowly, with a caution that should never have belonged to something so young, the puppy moved toward her hand. Not fast, not trusting, testing, remembering. His nose touched her finger, and then he pressed forward, hard, as if the warmth of her skin was the only real thing left in the world, and he needed to confirm it still existed. Jess lifted him carefully, supporting his body with both hands, keeping him close enough to feel warmth but not pressure. His heartbeat was fast and thin against her palms. His fur was cold. His weight was wrong. Too light, even lighter than before. Behind her, Harlan exhaled. That's him, he asked quietly. Yes. Jess turned toward the trees and stopped. Not because of the truck, not because of the woods, because of the sound. Soft, familiar, too far to make sense. A low whine, not from Ember, from somewhere behind them, from the direction of the road. Jess turned fully, and there at the edge of the clearing where the trees thinned and the service road bent out of sight, Coda stood, alone, breathing hard, harder than Jess had ever seen her breathe. Her legs trembled beneath her weight, and her paws were dark with mud and raw from the road. She had run the entire distance 40 minutes by truck on legs that had been starved and strained for years before Jess ever found her. She had run until her body had nothing left to give, and then she had kept running. She had followed. Jess had closed the door. She had said stay. She had driven on roads that twisted and doubled back through forest and frozen ground. And Coda had come anyway, not by command, not by training, not by any system that had ever been imposed on her, by something older, something that lived beneath obedience, beneath conditioning, beneath every reflex that had been built into her by hands that never cared whether she survived, only whether she produced. She had tracked them, alone, through miles of cold and silence, through territory she didn't know, past roads she had never traveled. She had followed the thing that the system had tried hardest to remove from her, and failed. Coda didn't run to Ember. She didn't rush. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her body trembling. Every muscle wanted to move. Every instinct screamed to close the distance. But she held herself still because she was choosing, not reacting, not obeying, not submitting to the loudest impulse or the deepest conditioning. Choosing one step, then another, measured, controlled. Each one deliberate as if she was proving to herself that her body belonged to her now, that she could move because she decided to, not because someone made her. She reached Jess, stopped, looked at Ember in her arms. The puppy stirred, made a small sound, a sound that had no name but meant everything. Then Coda looked at Jess, and slowly she pressed her head forward. Not to the puppy, to Jess's hand. A brief touch, steady, certain, not asking, not testing, trusting. The word was too small for what it was. Trust implied a calculation, a weighing of odds. This was something past calculation. Coda had no evidence that Jess would not fail her, no guarantee that warmth would last, no proof that this moment wouldn't be taken away like every other moment before it. She pressed forward anyway. Harlan watched in silence. Tessa from a distance lowered her notebook slightly. Something in that moment didn't belong to evidence, didn't belong to systems. It belonged to something simpler and harder to break. They moved quickly after that, loaded what they needed, marked what remained. Harlan made the call he had been holding back, not for permission, for record. The drive back should have been quiet. It was mostly. Ember slept against Jess's jacket on the passenger seat, his body finally warm enough to unclench. Coda lay on the floor beneath him, her side pressed against the base of the seat, one ear tilted upward. Not for danger, for breathing. They were nearly home when the truck appeared. It came from the opposite direction. Dark paint, clean windows, moving at exactly the speed limit. It slowed as it passed, and Nolan Price looked out from behind the wheel. He didn't stop, didn't block the road, just slowed long enough for his eyes to find Jess through the windshield. She pulled over, not because she had to, because she chose to. Nolan stopped his truck 30 feet ahead, got out, walked back without hurrying, hands in his coat, posture unchanged. The practiced calm of a man who believed he could afford patience because the system would outlast any individual act of resistance. "You think this changes anything?" he asked. His voice was calm, almost curious. Jess stood beside her truck. She didn't lean against it, didn't fold her arms. Stood the way she had been trained to stand when the situation required presence more than force. Nolan's eyes moved to Coda, visible through the window, then to the shape of Ember sleeping on the seat, then back to Jess. This system doesn't stop because one person decides it should, he said. Jess met his gaze. She didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't deliver a speech about right and wrong. She had learned a long time ago that people like Nolan didn't respond to arguments. They responded to something they couldn't calculate. She just held his eyes, steady, present, without flinching, without looking away, without giving him the reaction his certainty required in order to feel complete. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then something in Nolan's expression changed. Not fear, not doubt, something smaller, a fracture in the practice surface. The momentary recognition that he was looking at someone who could not be moved by the things that moved most people. He straightened his jacket, turned, walked back to his truck. He did not look back. Jess waited until his truck disappeared around the bend. Then she got in and drove home. The article ran 3 days later. Tessa Calloway wrote it the way she did everything. Not dramatic, not sensational, detailed, careful. It didn't accuse without proof, didn't exaggerate. It simply laid out what had been found. Facilities that moved without names, records that didn't align, animals treated as units rather than lives. The structure of a system that depended on silence and efficiency and the assumption that no one would care enough to look. It ran in the county paper first, then got picked up by 2 larger outlets. Not because of spectacle, because of specificity. Names weren't named, but patterns were mapped, routes documented, the kind of evidence that forced questions even from people who preferred not to ask them. The facility was closed officially within the week, paperwork filed, inspections logged. Deputy Harlan made sure of that. The system behind it did not collapse. It never did. Not from one article, not from one person. But something had happened. Records had been taken, names written down, patterns documented. The kind of quiet resistance that didn't look like victory, but made the next step harder for those who depended on darkness. Sutton Dern left town 2 days after the article ran. Jess never learned where he went. But she heard through Harlan that he had given a full accounting of routes, dates, and contacts before he disappeared. Every name he remembered, every road he had driven, every stop he had made in the years he had spent carrying things he tried not to think about. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. Spring did not arrive with a declaration. It came quietly, the way healing always did, without announcement, without certainty, and without asking permission from the past. Snow withdrew in uneven patches across the fields, revealing earth that looked almost surprised to exist again. The road softened, the wind lost its edge, and the light, no longer sharp and cutting, began to settle into something warmer. At the edge of town, the church doors stayed open, not out of necessity, out of habit now. People came, not in crowds, not in spectacle, one by one, then two, then more. They came with small things, old blankets, leftover food, tools that still had some life left in them. They came with silence that didn't feel empty anymore. At Jess's house, the fence was new, not improvised, not temporary, built with intention. The posts were set deep, the boards aligned clean, the gate reinforced with hinges that would not fail under weather or time. The very hinges that had started all of this. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a decision. Jess worked without rushing, measured, precise, the same way she had always done things that mattered. But now there was something different in the way she moved. Not softer, not slower, just less guarded. She paused more often, not to scan, to observe. Ember ran across the yard, small legs stronger now. Movements no longer uncertain but full of reckless, uncalculated life. The puppy chased nothing in particular, just light, just wind, just the idea that it could. Flint followed in bursts, still bold, still unwilling to accept limitation. Sage stayed closer, watching, learning, choosing when to join. And Wren. Wren had begun to move, not far, not fast. But she no longer remained in the corner. Her eyes still carried distance, but sometimes they settled on the light, on the movement, on something that looked like the present tense. Jess leaned against the fence post and watched them, not as a handler, not as a protector, just as someone who was there. She didn't smile, but her shoulders had lowered. Her breathing had changed. There were fewer moments where her body prepared for something that wasn't coming, that mattered more than anything visible. It happened in the late afternoon, the kind of quiet hour where the world seems to hold itself still not out of fear, but out of contentment. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the yard. Ember ran faster, now stronger, not looking back, not checking for danger, just running. And then he stopped, abruptly, right in the middle of the yard. Jess noticed it first, not because of sound, because of stillness. Ember stood there, ears lifted, body alert, not in fear, not in confusion, listening. The others slowed. Flint circled once unsure. Sage sat. Wren lifted her head, and Koda stood. Her body didn't tense, didn't lower, didn't prepare. She simply stepped forward one step, then another, until she stood beside Ember and looked out across the field. Not at the road, not at the house, not at any visible thing, but out as if something invisible had just passed through the world and left behind a space that only they could feel. The moment faded, as all moments do. Ember shook himself and ran again. The others followed. The yard returned to motion, but something in the air had changed, something that didn't need a name. Dorothea arrived just before dusk. She carried the basket under one arm and moved through the yard with the careful ease of someone who had long ago made peace with the pace her body allowed. She handed out the scarves without ceremony, one for Flint, one for Sage, one draped gently beside Wren, who sniffed it once and then rested her chin on it. When she reached Koda, she paused, not because Koda hesitated, but because she didn't. Koda stood still, her body relaxed in a way that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Her coat had begun to regain its depth. The black along her back was no longer dull. The tan at her chest and legs had softened into something warmer. Her ribs no longer pressed sharply beneath her fur. But it wasn't the body that had changed most. It was the way she occupied space. No longer on the edge, no longer waiting to be told what she was worth. Dorothea knelt slowly and placed the scarf around Koda's neck, gently, right where the scar had been, where the collar had pressed, where the breeding strap had sat for years until it wore the fur away and left a mark that should have been a wound but had become somehow proof that she had survived it. Koda didn't flinch, didn't step away. She simply stood there, allowing it, then sat, calmly. That alone said everything. Jess finished the fence as the sun dropped lower. She wiped her hands on her pants, stepped back and looked at it. Not perfect, but solid. That was enough. She walked to the gate, reached into the back of the truck and pulled out a piece of wood. Already cut, already sanded, prepared before she knew she would use it. She had carved the letters herself late at night 3 nights ago when the house was quiet and the dogs were sleeping, and she needed to do something with her hands that wasn't preparing for what might come next. She set it in place, took a moment, then secured it. The letters were carved, not painted, not rushed, not decorative, just clear. No soul is worthless just because someone priced it wrong. She stepped back, read it once, then let it be. Dorothea stood beside her, hands folded, eyes on the sign. "You chose your words carefully," she said. "I didn't choose them," Jess replied. "They were already there." Dorothea smiled faintly. "That's usually how truth works." Behind them, the yard moved with life. The puppies chased each other in wide, joyful circles that had no purpose except joy itself. Wren walked slowly along the fence line, pausing to take in the world without retreating from it. And Koda stood in the center of it all, not guarding, not calculating, not positioning herself between danger and the things she loved, just present. just alive. Jess turned slightly, watched her. Coda caught the movement, looked at her, and then her tail moved. Not once, not uncertain, not restrained. It moved fully, freely, a complete motion from root to tip, a gesture that carried no hesitation, no memory of restraint, no calculation of consequence. Just expression, just life. Jess didn't look away this time. She let herself see it, all of it. And for a brief moment she allowed herself to understand what it meant. Not rescue, not redemption, not victory. Something quieter, something steadier. A life returned to itself. The road beyond the field remained unchanged. The world beyond the town continued as it always had. Systems did not collapse overnight. Wrong did not disappear because it had been seen. But here in this space, something had been interrupted. Something had been refused. Something had been chosen differently. And that mattered. Not everything broken is without value. Not everything discarded is meant to be lost. Coda was not worthless. She was misjudged. Ember was not weak. He was simply waiting for a moment of mercy. And Jess was not searching for purpose. Yet purpose found her anyway. Sometimes what we call chance is something greater at work. A meeting at the right time. A life crossing another life at the exact moment it matters. A door opening when the world seemed closed. You may never stand in a snow-covered field or rescue a dog from harm, but you will meet your own moments. A neighbor who feels alone, a stranger who needs patience, a quiet opportunity to do something good that no one else will see. And in those moments you have a choice, to look away or to become part of something that matters in someone else's life.